Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 921. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
I'm George Conger. Today is July 8th, 2025.
All right, welcome to another show. We're glad you could join us. Before we get too far into the show, sometimes I forget to tell you this. Please like the episode. You click that little thumb. Share this episode with friend and foe. Go to the comment section and comment away what you guys do. I appreciate that very much. We try to post this live to tape at 5 o'clock on Tuesdays. That's Eastern time. If you get there, you can have a live conversation with other viewers. That's fun to do. What have I forgotten? Oh, if you've not subscribed yet, and according to YouTube, 47% of you have not subscribed yet. I don't know what your problem is. There's that rectangle, the red rectangle sticking out at you. It says subscribe. Anybody can push it. You click it, boom, up pops the bell. I want to be instantly notified when there's a new episode. You click the bell. And in theory, if everything's working properly and the gods at YouTube and the people who designed your browser have all synced up, you're going to get instantly notified whenever there's a new episode of Anglican Unscripted. George, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing fantastic. It's been a beautiful week here. Rains every day at 3 o'clock, but otherwise it's Florida weather. We're just so much going on in life. Tragedies, crises, joys, celebration from the people in the community and our church, and being a priest is just riding that wave from the crest to the trough every single day.
Well, yeah, I mean that's it. I mean, there's never a time in our world when there's not a national disaster, which we'll talk about in our first story. There's never a time in our life when people are not in crisis or have decided that they're going to follow Jesus. And that's a wonderful part of this ministry, is to be there to help them arrive to that. So, this week, over the July 4th weekend, Jill and I went up to Connecticut. If many of you know there, we used to live there for about 30 years. We raised our family there, and it was time to take the last remnants of Kevin and Jill out of Connecticut. We had a storage locker there for 5 years, where we put everything that was in the condo into the storage locker. And over the last 5 years, we'd go back and we'd get rid of more and more, make trips to Goodwills and other ministries, giving our stuff away. And George, I'm happy to say that the locker is empty. There's nothing in there. Well, there's two people in there. There's nothing left in that locker. And I've got a couple of plastic bins here we still have to go through. But, you know, for Western consumerist, we consumed a lot, and it was I think I'm down to, what do they say, you can live on 25 items. I'm down to 25, George. So
yeah, but I have a house and a storage locker and an office and a shed. We've got my mother and father's furniture, Susan's mother's and father's furniture, you know.
No, I don't.
I have 28 items on my desk right now, let alone 28 in my life. So I kudos to you for being organized.
Well, here's one of my 25. I bought a new truck last year, and so I count that as one of my 25 or 28. I have my bicycle, my laptop I use for Anglican Unscripted, and then a few other things. Mrs. Anglican TV has a couple more things than I do. You know.
Oh, Kevin, like on my desk, I have this lovely marble pen and pencil set given by the Insurance Company of North America to my father in 1972. Little bronze, little plaque right here. How am I going to get rid of that? You know, even though, you know, you pull out your little cross pen and it's all fun to look at, but Kevin, the crap that you wind up with in life.
All right, on to our first story. In a tragic turn of events, catastrophic flooding struck central Texas over the 4th of July weekend, claiming the lives of at least 104 people, including 27 campers and counselors from Camp Mystic, an all-Christian girls' summer camp along the Guadalupe River in Kerr County. Torrential rains dumping up to 10 inches in hours caused a river to surge from 3 feet to 35 feet, sweeping away cabins, homes, and vehicles with little warning. As of July 8th, 10 campers and 1 counselor from Camp Mystic remain missing. And when there's tragedy, there's triumph, but it's hard sometimes to find. And your sermon this week was what happens when good things happen to bad people. And I thought we can cover all this because there's also an ACNA connection.
Yeah, the Saturday afternoon, I got an anonymous email through our web server at the church asking, why does God allow this tragedy to take place? And I can't believe in a God who would allow little children to die like this. And so I ripped up my sermon all about Naaman the Syrian and did a sermon on why is there evil in the world? Of course, I didn't answer the question to everybody's satisfaction, but it's a real issue. Why would God allow this to happen? The answer is I don't know. I can tell you how it happened. You know, we know that Tropical Storm Barry stalled because of a high pressure ridge and the water that was going to be dumped into the Gulf. And we were supposed to get 7 inches of rain here in Florida. We got like a 1/4 inch of rain. And the reason why was because it all got stuck over the hill country of Texas, which is not designed to absorb large. It's not like Florida where we can get 7 inches of rain and
what happened?
Oh, what happened?
Yeah.
Because of the soil or this. Well, some of it's stories of horrific tragedy, but also resilience, triumph, and silent, quiet heroism from Scott Ruskin, who was the 26-year-old Coast Guard rescue swimmer who rescued. How many people did he rescue?
165 people in 12 hours.
And, you know, little thing in the Houston Chronicle was that he had left a job on Wall Street because he wanted to do something meaningful with his life. He
did. Okay.
Congratulations.
He just did. Yeah.
There was a Boy Scout camp affected in the path of this flood, and not a single Boy Scout was killed, and it was all the Eagle Scouts taking care of the little boys, the 8, 9, and 10-year-old boys, lifting them up into rafters, holding on. In other words, the Eagle Scouts came through, and just stories of heroism, quiet heroism, courage, determination, as well as great tragedy. That there was a funeral at St. Michael and All Saints in Dallas, big Episcopal church, for a 9-year-old little girl camper who was swept away. 600-700 people came to that. Texas, the culture in Texas is that there's not just one camp. There are many camps in this area of wilderness, and it's a cultural thing that people send their kids to. 8, 9, 10, and up to these summer camps that are Christian themed, and so it's not a denominational thing. Children from all across every denomination. There was an article I saw posted by I.R.S. Sunday Visitor, which is a Catholic magazine, where 2 little girls, 9 and 11, sisters, were found hand in hand, who had drowned, and they were holding each other's hand, and in the other hand they were holding rosaries. I mean, the stories are heartbreaking, frightening, but also there's a bit of optimism here of people helping people serving people, being there for people in need.
Well, when I saw an interview with one of the camp counselors, she talked about her fellow counselors at other camps who had died saving children. And she's like, so this interviewer from the Northeast, asking horrible questions, of course, asked, well, now what? She said, what do you mean now what? Now we sit back and we let the community take care of us. People are going to be offering clothing and food, and it's a time that this community will come together. And you could have heard a pin drop when the New York reporter is like, she doesn't understand that. And this is what community is for. Why do these tragedies happen? So we don't know. But we do know what our response is to be, and our response is to be those who seek to help. And so
what's extraordinary is such in the media landscape how bad the mainstream press has been in all this. But it really doesn't matter anymore because they're all but irrelevant. Used to be Dan Rather would be on the spot in that hurricane, and the whole world would watch him, and whatever he said, that would be the story. But today, with CBS shouting at the county commissioner, "Who do you blame for this?" They want to blame Donald. Donald Trump did X, Y, and Z, or Elon Musk did this, or it's all God's fault. The quality of journalism is so poor these days. That it's an irrelevancy.
It is, because at this point, I think all stories are made up. To one extent or another, left stories, right stories, and middle stories. Because the job now is to get people to click on your story. And if you can do that by having a strange anonymous source or to have a strange slant to your story that will get people to click on that title, you've earned your editor some money. You've earned your publisher some money. And that keeps you employed. Other than that, people are now using AI to develop stories.
Some things we can say with certainty, not because we heard it on ABC, NBC, or CBS, but we saw it on social media. The bishop of the Diocese of the Living Word, just name
Julian Dobbs. Julian
Dobbs posted about a priest named Dan Jones, rector of the ACNA congregation in Kerrville, which is the epicenter of these floodings. Fortunately, he and his wife were not home. Their adult son was, but the son survived, but the entire house was washed away. I mean, gone, washed away. They lost everything, and I think their church is gone, and their parishioners who are missing, and more and more of these little... But we're getting this news from Julian Dobbs. We're not getting it from... the networks or from the New York Times.
All right. Well, keep the Texas Hill Country in your prayers and watch how God works in this. If you're from afar and there's nothing you can do, you can observe and find out the spark of a faithful community of Christians and how they respond to this tragedy. All right, let's move on to our second story. Leicester. How do you pronounce that? Leicester?
Leicester.
There's no S there. How could that be Leicester? So, Leicester safeguarding scandal likely to knock Martin Snow out of the running for Archbishop of Canterbury. There's a big story here because he dropped the ball. Never happens in the UK, but let's talk about this, George.
Well, this is a story, oddly enough, in contradiction to what we last said, that it exists because of the BBC.
Yes. Last
year, 2024, Vanessa Pinto, who was a lay minister in the Diocese of Leicester, was convicted by a court of harassing a man. Now, this gets complicated. And it took about a year for the BBC to do an investigative report, deep dive into this. And why it matters is that Martin Snow, the Bishop of Leicester, screwed this one up for safeguarding, and he is touted as being one of the likely candidates to be Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, the story is Vanessa Pinto was a black lay minister in the Diocese of Leicester. She was commissioned by the Church of England, and she ticked off all the diversity boxes. And she was, elected to national committees and boards and this and that. And she also was a bit crazy, and she met a man who identifies as transgender. So we got another twist into this thing.
DEI, yes.
Yes, and she harassed him, and it got worse and worse with like dozens, if not hundreds, of texts and messages and stalking him, and this fellow took it to the diocese because this is an employee of the diocese. Well, the diocese said, well, who are we going to believe? A
person who doesn't know their gender, or
a person who ticks every box that we want to have on our diversity screen. Mm-hmm. And when the Bishop Martin Snow met with this fellow, Jay Holm, his name was, the complainant, one of the things was, we understand that you're practicing witchcraft in the church because you are lighting a candle in the church by yourself. You know, I have some Hispanic ladies who come to our church, and we must be doing witchcraft because they're lighting enough candles to start a barbecue at the back of the church.
Yeah, little red candles.
Well, so this all came out, and here's a wonderful kicker. This woman didn't just originate in the Diocese of Leicester. She was from the Diocese of Aberdeen and Orkney and Dyer.
No.
Crazy. The bully Bishop of Aberdeen gave her a recommendation for this job. So, well, long and short of it is, after her conviction, she resigned and quit from all her jobs in the church and is doing community service, didn't get a custodial service. And a year later, the BBC's reporting on it just in time to blow up Martin Snow for having screwed this up by basically saying, I want to believe this person, not that person, because this person is a creepy transgender person, and this person is a black lay woman who seems to be going places and who we'd love to put out in front of for the church's image. So, Martin, I'm sorry, you're done. You're cooked.
It's
BBC stuck a knife in you.
But I don't know why he's cooked, because that is the same trait that Justin Welby had. Covering things up, looking the other way, not meeting with the victims in a timely manner. I mean, that's what makes a great Archbishop of Canterbury, if history serves here, George.
Well, the other thing is that I think the bureaucracy is such, and I don't want to make Martin Snow seem a bully or an idiot. He's not. It's just that the system he's in charge of, by the time it gets up to him, all truth and justice and compassion and mercy is squeezed out. And all he's got is a summary from an archdeacon saying, we have two complainants, it's a he said, she said, and here's the more attractive one that we want to push, so that's who we're going to believe. So from a business perspective, Martin Snow made the rational choice based upon the information he was given. From a pastoral perspective, he was a fiasco. It was Justin Welby all over.
This lady came with a recommendation from a bishop, too. So, he was in a no-win situation. Let's move on to our next story. In a significant ruling, the Episcopal Church's Court of Review on July 2nd sided with Reverend Casey Ramey, overturning the Diocese of Virginia's disciplinary action against him for his 3-year Eucharistic fast. This is something we reported on a couple times already. He wanted to fast. His bishop said you can't fast, and brought him up on charges. The Court of Review says, that's a fast. You didn't do it right.
Well, that's the thing. He was deposed for basically being a prig.
In your opinion.
Okay, in my opinion. Okay, he's a white man. He had a little church that was dying, and he's into the racial justice stuff. And he said, I'm going to go on a Eucharistic fast, yes. No Holy Communion, until the Episcopal Church repents of its complicity in the evils of slavery and things of that. And the bishop at the time, Susan Goff, who was the acting bishop, said, no, don't do that. That's stupid. And he said, well, I'm doing it for justice reasons. And then when Mark Stevenson, the new bishop, came in and said, don't do that. That's stupid. And he did it. And so they put him on trial, and he was convicted of conduct unbecoming a member of the clergy, ignoring the rubrics of the prayer book, all sorts of stuff. And he appealed this ruling, and the Court of Appeal surprisingly found in his behavior saying, the bishops just screwed this up. They never issued a godly admonition, a piece of paper saying, you may not do this, in writing. They just said, don't do that. That's stupid. They didn't follow the procedures. They didn't follow due process. So this guy, who is in my opinion, is an utter fiasco as a priest. I mean, The diocese made the right decision, and Virginia is a liberal diocese as things
yes, it
go.
Is. Yeah,
not as crazy as others, but it is fairly progressive. They made such a mess of this that the Court of Appeal said, "I'm sorry, you can't do it this way." So what the end results are that the power of the bishop has been basically, in a good way, held to a standard of due process. Now, there was a minority. It was like a 10-6 ruling in the board, and the minority said, "This guy, he's a God help us. Get rid of this fellow. A Eucharistic fast and you're preet. Well, yeah, it's because you've run off everybody from your church, so you don't need to have Eucharist because there's nobody there but you."
Well, it says the majority opinion clarified that it did not endorse Ramsey's actions. It ruled that his fast did not violate his ordinational vows as he ensured his parish. So, the majority and the minority agree that this isn't right, but it was done improperly.
Yeah, he said, "Oh, well, you can go get communion, at another church, and I'll let you know when they're another." It wasn't that he forbade Holy Communion, just he wasn't going to do it. But again, there's some good news out of this because it gives some structure to the disciplinary process, so that a bishop, just because you have a priest that is it's a God help us is the best way I can describe it.
Well, he's a virtual signaler. Come on.
Well, I don't think he's going to find a job again in the Episcopal Church.
No,
okay,
there's got to be something.
Kevin,
San Francisco, L.A. Come on, no, and I agree.
Well, maybe the National Cathedral could use another virtue signaler on its staff, but whatever. But it's good that the bishops are held accountable, and when they make a mistake so egregious that the rule of law says, "I'm sorry, you can't do that," that's a good thing.
It is. All right, let's move on to our next story. As I described before we started here, that I'm downsizing. I'm trying to attain less and less things. However, in our next story, the president of Kenya, William Ruto, how would you pronounce that? Ruto has decided that he wants an Anglican state church on the grounds of the State House. He's expanding where I'm trying to contract in Nairobi. He sparked a debate over separation of church and state in Kenya as he announced July 6th during a service at Altstain's Cathedral that he wanted this built.
This is an interesting thing happening here in Kenya, and that Archbishop Jackson Ole Sapit, who is the primate of the Anglican Church of Kenya, has saying normally he'd be in favor of anybody wanting to build a church anytime, any place, anywhere. But the president of Kenya has said that I wanted to build a church on the grounds of, next to the White House.
Yes.
So that there are reports it would seat 8,000 people, or would only seat 300 people and their families. So that's 1,000 in Africa plus. Say 1,000 seat at minimum church, and it would be an Anglican church. And Jackson Ole Sapit say, "Oh, wait a second. We need to, build our churches. We don't want the government doing it." And the Constitution of Kenya says that we are a secular republic. There is no established religion. And if you make the Anglican Church the state religion by having a church built by the government or built by you, President Ruto, where basically we're breaking the wall between church and state. And of course the Catholics are all upset. Well, why can't it be a Catholic church? And the Muslims are saying, well, why can't we have a mosque if we have a church too? But here's an interesting case where the Archbishop is pressing the wall of separation of church and state while the president is trying to obliterate it.
I don't know why he's having a WWF or a UFC championship fight on the property of the White House there. That's in. That's the future of entertainment. Yeah, I don't know. He's Anglican. He loves the cathedral. He loves his church. He loves his diocese and province. But this is a step too far. This is obviously going to cause bias and animosity within his country, and I don't think you want to do that.
Oh, his arguments, his supporters' arguments are that, well, he says, I want it, and therefore I get it, because I'm president. But his supporters say, well, during colonial times, the British set aside land next to the State House for a church, and the Anglican Church was the unofficial colonial chaplaincy for the British when they ruled Kenya. And we're just continuing that process, but we're upgrading the old ratty tin shack the British left us to put in a modern, brand new facility. So nothing new here, folks, is what the president's people are saying. What's new here is that this will be the focus of religious life in Kenya, where the president will go there on Sundays, and that'll be televised, and he picks the preachers, and he may be the preacher sometimes.
Or senior warden.
It's definitely senior warden. But the issue here for the Archbishop is that I'm happy to build churches, but this is the one place in Kenya we just don't need another church right now. But interesting to see the church standing in this way.
Yes. This is not a story I thought would have appeared on Anglican Unscripted, certainly in a country like Kenya, but there it is. Moving on to another country, Mexico. The Anglican Church of Mexico. I can't talk today. It might be a lack of coffee. That's all I can think of. The Anglican Church of Mexico, also known as the Episcopal Church of Mexico, remains deeply divided. Now, it's not a left-right issue. This is a chromosome issue, as we will discuss. And its schism has entered a third year following a contentious June 2022 General Synod, where the Most Reverend Cruz was elected primate in a process critics labeled as flawed and unlawful. And the dispute continues because there's a lady involved, George.
Sort of. Archbishop Cruz Trevino. Hispanic culture, they have, mother and father's name and name.
They do.
He goes by Trevino. There are 5 dioceses in Mexico, and they're split along the traditional Mexican divide between the indigenous and European parts of Mexico, between the north and the south, between the better educated and the less educated, between the wealthy and the poor. So southern Mexico, which goes from the Yucatan Peninsula down into along the borders of Guatemala and whatnot, and western Mexico, which goes up on the coast, covering Acapulco and places like that, Jalisco. They're in schism from northern Mexico, Cuernavaca, and Mexico itself, which is the Mexico City. And it's a power fight. And this has been going on for 3 years now. And this has not received a lot of coverage because almost all the documentation's in Spanish. And being Americans, we frankly don't care about what happens in Mexico, so long as we get our margaritas on time and the cruise ship leaves Cancun with us on it. But this is a fight, again, about systems and justice. The Mexican polity requires that a primate have 2/3 of the vote to be elected archbishop. At the synod, first there was dispute over the delegation from northern Mexico. The election in northern Mexico was challenged at the time because the old outgoing bishop put in his man and excluded several clergy and lay delegates so that he got the result he wanted. Well, this was challenged in the courts, and that was a separate issue. So 2 northern Mexican delegations came down to the synod. Well, the Archbishop Trevino, who was in the chair, recognized ones that supported him, not those who did not. And with this group of supporters, he got 50% plus 1 vote and was declared the primate. Well, Archbishop Julio Cesar Martin of southern Mexico said, wait a second, you need 2/3. You can't just say I've got 50% plus one and I'm primate. And the Archbishop Trevino said, well, tough to you. So we had the initial split. Well, and then Trevino began to ordain a bishop for Mexico, Sally Hernandez, and as to sort of bolster his ranks among the House of Bishops. And so then became 3-2. And then the Anglican Communion Office got involved. And normal Anglican political calculus would say that Julio Cesar Martin is a liberal. He spent most of his ministry in Canada. He actually trained in Canada. And he is very supportive of same-sex marriage, gay blessings, abortion, the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. He is entirely on board. He fits nicely with the Anglican Church of Canada and the Episcopal Church. Western Mexico, Bishop Gomez, he's more conservative. He's more, akin to the bishops of South America in his mindset. No, I don't want this. Those two, pro-gay and anti-gay, if you will, are allied against the other bloc. But girls' rule is now the new way of the Anglican Communion, because Joe Bailey Wells, who was the assistant at the Anglican Consultative Council, who was also the one named in the Macon report for misconduct, she's great buddies with Sally Sue Hernandez and found in her favor. And so the Anglican Communion Office recognizes Trevino, but has no authority to do so, and has no justification for doing so other than that these girls are such chums. So it's just an utter complete mess, because it's now in the Mexican court system, which evidently takes generations.
A long time. Yes, it does. It takes a long time.
Generations to resolve itself. And there was the courts initially found against Trevino, saying, look, 2/3 is 2/3. But he's appealed that, and an appeal will take 5 to 7 years. And by that time, he'll be in his 70s, and they'll have, everybody will be dead. But Mexico is, at this point, 2 de facto provinces where roughly 50% versus 50%. And the outsiders sent by the Anglican Communion Office to investigate were Linda Nichols, the old primate of Canada, Joe Bailey Wells, and Bishop Alvarado of Puerto Rico. And they split 2-1 as well, with the 2 girls siding against the 1 boy. Yeah. And picking, chums. So
chromosomes.
Kevin, it's actually, we're now at a point where the women's movement trumps the gay movement when they come in direct contact.
Yes. Or the abortion. Yeah, it's a strange story, and it's hard to put together because it's a 3-year-old story we've covered. And if I remember correctly, Manuel Moreno, didn't he die in 2024? So
when the election was screwed up, the Cesar Martin and Gomez asked the old primate Moreno to stay in as acting primate till this was all done, and he said, "Okay, fine, I will." But then he died, and so the one interim figure that everybody could say, well, yeah, he was Archbishop, and we'll just let him keep kicking along, he died. So again, you got another twist there.
In a deepening controversy within the Anglican Diocese of Western Newfoundland, Bishop John Organ has defied a June 2025 directive from Archbishop Dave Edwards, Metropolitan of the Province of Canada, to take a terminal sabbatical until his scheduled retirement October 1st, and to reinstate the Very Reverend Catherine Short, Dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist in Corner Brook, whose ministry license he revoked in January 2025. The directive followed a 129-page investigative report by the Provincial Misconduct Officer, which found Oregon violated the province's safe church charter through economic misconduct, discriminatory employment practices, emotional misconduct, and bullying in the dismissal of Short, who had faced conflicts within the congregation and alleged Oregon pressured her to return prematurely from cancer treatment. Organ, and a pastoral letter called the investigation unfair and biased, vowing to remain in office and seek further inquiry. Boy, do they have problems in Canada, George.
Again, it's a story of systems not working.
Yep.
The Anglican Church of Canada does not have an effective clergy disciplinary system. It's essentially diocesan-driven, which puts the bishop as prosecutor, judge, and jury. And so a bishop can decide whether he wants to hear a case, a bishop decides on the case, and the bishop decides on the problem. And that includes cases brought against him. Mm-hmm. In this case, the bishop, John Organ, fired the dean of the cathedral in Cornerbrook, which is the cathedral city in western Newfoundland, Catherine Short. And he did so because she wasn't cooperating, wasn't being a very good team player. Well, Short complained, and the diocese said, well, fine, complain to the bishop, and he'll hear your case. And guess what the answer was? No. And so she went higher up the ladder. But the diocese, but there was no higher place to go. So she complained to the ecclesiastical archbishop of the province. Canada has a number of provinces, each with its own archbishop,
yep.
Like Nigeria, for instance, or England, York and Canterbury. And Canada is the Maritimes, the eastern sort of, from New Brunswick up, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, whatnot. And they went to the archbishop there, who did a review, and he found that the bishop there, John Organ, had behaved badly. And he recommended that Bishop Organ take a terminal sabbatical. You're leaving the door in 3 months. You're leaving at the end of October, when you time out for retirement. Just go on leave now and let her go back to her job because she was popular at the cathedral. Well, John Organ has said, forget that. I'm not going anywhere. And we're now at a point where there's no structural way other than peer pressure to get this bishop to relent, to give the dean back her job. And it's because the Canadian ecclesiastical justice system is broken. Worse than the Mexican, if you will.
It is.
The Mexican at least have the rules that say how you should do it. They just don't follow them. It's Mexico, after all. Badges, we don't need no stinking badges here. But in Canada, they don't even work. What are badges?
What's a badge? Yeah. Well, a bishop in Canada can sue a parishioner and win. It's a strange system they have up there.
That's the case. You remember Bishop Niagara sued a blogger for likening him to one of the Kims, North Korean dictator. He took offense at the that. And my God, Michael Bird was the name of the bishop.
That's right. Yeah.
What well, I won't be on that.
No.
Not the smartest move to sue your parishioners for making fun of you.
And all right, let's move on to the next story. Lambeth Palace, the historic residence of Archbishop of Canterbury, is in London, has completed a £40 million reservation. That's how you'd say it, right? We say dollars here in America. It's pounds over there. The first major refurbishment in over 7 years. The project aimed at preserving the 800-year-old Grade 1 listing as a building.
Grade 1 listing. Grade 1 listing.
Is it called Grade 1, not Grade I? Okay. Good.
Grade 1.
Grade 1. Modernized its facilities to support the Church of England's operations while advancing its net zero carbon goal by 2030. Oh boy, I'll talk about that later. Through energy efficient upgrades, solar panels, insulation, and other whatnots, George. Yay!
Yeah, and this follows a £20 million construction of a new library for Lambeth Palace about 3 years ago. So 60 million pounds over the last few years under Justin Welby's watch to fix up Lambeth Palace. Now, I will concede it needed double glazed windows,
yes.
And the radiators were pretty tatty. And some of the repair was to fix some bomb damage the Germans caused in World War II. But I don't dispute that. And I don't like the design of the library myself, but the aesthetics are not. That's that sort of brutalist, ugly look. But and the work, I'm sure, is wonderfully done and great for the designers and the architects and the historical conservationists. But man, it's just not a good look to spend £60 million fixing up the boss's place when you have clergy out in the countryside just being destroyed by lack of resources, lack of money to hire for curates, lack of money for program and projects, and instead thrown money at Lambeth Palace, thrown money at net zero, £100 million from the church commissioners for slavery reparations. Whoever is in charge of the spending really is not, I don't want to say bright, but is not aware of their surroundings or circumstances.
The optics are difficult. You and I see images from the BBC and other news outlets in downtown London of the marches against immigration that's happening. We see a lot of the housing issues are in the news over here. And to see money being spent on the lavishness and upgrades of Lambeth when all else is kind of falling through in England, in the UK, you're like, I don't know, bad imaging.
I mean, what if the Church of England spent that $60 million, if they wanted to do construction, built new housing, built social housing? I mean, there's a horrendous housing shortage in England, brought on, some say mostly, by the unfettered immigration. That all the housing stock that young people would move into is now being given to immigrants, and so they have no place to live, and they can't afford to buy a house. It's just a difficult situation. Instead of investing, in double glazing at the Bishop's Palace, because I'm sure that'll be fine for another 10 years. Now, first you fix the broken pipes. I'm not saying don't do that, but
yeah, absolutely.
And World War II was 80 years ago, and we can get around to fixing what the Germans did maybe next year or whatever.
Yeah.
But with the tremendous needs that is facing England in its everything from its housing stock to its moral stock. Remember last issue we talked about Death Week in Parliament, killing babies and grandma, euthanasia and infanticide and abortion up until the moment of birth. And the money's being spent by the Church of England on what? Making the Archbishop's Palace prettier.
No. Today, there is a Catholic Mass happening at Canterbury Cathedral. Just got images on Twitter. The visiting enclave for the Pope is there, celebrating Thomas Becket or something. Hey,
it's a modern world. I mean, you remember last year, there's a big stink. Some will stink, oh, well, you can't have Catholics do that. Well, last year, remember the Bishop of Fulham and some Anglo-Catholic clergy had a meeting in London, had a meeting in Rome, and they were allowed to celebrate the Eucharist at, I think it was St. John's Lateran, the cathedral, the original cathedral in Rome. So this is the modern age, so long as they don't allow a Muslim service at the Canterbury Cathedral. They've done that in the Episcopal Cathedral in New York at Washington, but just so long as we don't hear the Muezzins call from the pulpit, I'm okay with having Catholics doing their thing. Hey, if they're going to rent out the space, might as well be Catholics.
Absolutely. It's not a rave. That's the good part, People aren't dancing to some satanic music. It's not a metal band. It's the Roman Catholics.
Oh, well, actually, thinking of that little story out of this is, folks, the only place you're going to hear this stuff. St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town, which is the cathedral in South Africa.
Yeah.
They are under hot water for allowing a dance party in their cathedral. Now, they had held it from like 10 to 2, and there was no alcohol, and it was basically a good children's party. In other words, wasn't with psychedelics and the whole rave. It was a rave in name only.
Yes.
But the South African general public just blew a gasket. How dare you? Mm-hmm. How dare you have Taylor Swift playing within the cathedral precincts of... Now, they have a point about Taylor Swift, but,
it's crazy. All right, last story.
But the craving for cultural relevance is not just an American or European phenomenon. We're seeing it in Africa as well.
As many of you know, that Anglican TV is a 501(c) according to the I.R.S. at the federal government and Florida state. And under certain rules as a 501(c), I'm governed by a board. I have to have a budget. I can't raise money in certain ways, and I can't endorse political candidates. George, as the rector of a Locanto church, can't get up and say, guys, it's time. We need Harris. This is it. All right, she's going to be the next queen of the United States of America, and we need her in office. You can't do it. Until yesterday. The I.R.S. has always historically prohibited preachers from endorsing political candidates. However, in a significant change as of yesterday, churches can now endorse candidates from the pulpit without losing your 501(c) status. This came via a court ruling that was settled in a lawsuit by two Texas churches at the National Religious Broadcast Association, who argued the Johnson Amendment, which allows us not to endorse candidates, violated free speech and religious freedom. George, I can't wait for you to endorse the next Democrat for president.
Oh, this is a terrible decision. Absolute terrible. Mm-hmm. It's called, what was it? Who's Johnson?
Johnson,
it's
yeah.
Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson put in a rule when he became president to block preachers from getting up in the pulpit and from the pulpit denouncing him and the war in Vietnam. And that's basically the legal foundations of it. And this has basically been ignored because in the black church, historic African-American churches, they do this all the time. And we would see again and again and again Joe Biden and at the pulpit of these churches. Well, the I.R.S. would turn and look away. This lawsuit was brought by conservatives to say, hey, you've given the liberals a pass on this. You allow Bishop Buddy of Washington, D.C. to get in the pulpit and denounce Donald Trump.
To his face.
And there are no consequences. But if we get up and say God wants Donald Trump to be president, the I.R.S. will be all over us in a minute. And the court ruled based upon a strict legal interpretation. Yes, this violates free speech. Yes, it violates religious freedom. Nevertheless, I think this is a terrible precedent, terrible decision, because for me the key phrase is in the pulpit. If a priest or a minister or a pastor brings politics into the pulpit, he is not a pastor anymore. I have utter contempt for not for those who hold political opinions. I hold political opinions. Watch this show, you know them. Yeah. So, I'm free to say whatever, but when I get up in the pulpit and there I'm to preach the word of God and teach the people about the saving grace and nature of Jesus Christ, if I say you need to vote for Proposition 1, 2, 3 because that's what God would have you do, we're back in the good old medieval days where the priest tells you ignorant peasants how you need to think and believe.
Sure. Yeah.
To me, it violates my understanding what it means to be a priest. In my county here, you go to the Presbyterian church down the road, every single bumper sticker there was for Donald Trump, and they were all, happy, the MAGA Republicans and this and that, and they do that from the pulpit. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Go to the Unitarian church, the other part of town, they're all Democrats. Here we have both, and it is not part of our life together. We have Democrats and Republicans, liberals, conservatives, worshiping one God, and our focus is on that one God and our family in Christ, not on the latest, greatest craziness from Washington. And for these idiot pastors and idiot church commentators, and I will say idiot because they're immature and they don't know anything about the true nature of Jesus Christ, to say that we need to bring in party politics into the pulpit. That's an abomination.
It is. Well, but
now, what do I really think, Kevin? Do you want to know what I really think?
Well, but I want to back up a little bit and say you're using the word politics broadly. I have no trouble with a preacher talking about abortion, even though it's a political topic. I have no trouble with a preacher talking about end of life planning. It's a political topic. I have no.
You have to.
I have no trouble
to distinguish between the moral issue.
Sure.
Whether it's the death penalty, whether it's this, that, and the other, and vote for Fred Phelps because he's the man that can deliver for us and he's God's man. Yeah. That's crossing the line.
That's a crossing line. But I don't mind politics in the pulpit as long as it's related to the good news. Okay.
That's not, I don't consider that politics. Mm-hmm. I don't consider that politics. For me, politics is party politics.
Sure. I get that.
And this is what the I.R.S. said you couldn't do. You couldn't do party politics. Mm-hmm. You could talk about abortion. You could talk about gay rights. You could talk about all these things, and there was no consequence, and they're all political issues. Mm-hmm. But when it got down to, okay, folks, we vote for this fellow because he supports what we believe, that is wrong. And that's what's not been allowed.
I don't want to go to a Joel Osteen type church and find on their big screen banner President Trump is the official endorsed candidate of this church. That's come on. As a 501(c) operation, that's so wrong. So that's not. But hey, that's our final story. You have to run it in 10 minutes to get out of here. Is there anything we missed? I don't think we missed anything. A couple updates we'll cover next week. You got something?
The Indian corruption story. The Indian corruption? No? Okay.
I'm giving you guys a break. You're off early. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
And I'm George Conger. And you've been watching episode 921 of Anglican Unscripted.